We begin with breaking news from Washington, where Donald Trump has delivered a major salvo in his trade war, this time aimed squarely at Canada.
Should now be hit all goods coming from Canada with an additional 35% tariff. And this is one of the many that Donald Trump, according to these letters he's sending around to different countries.
A massive shift has just shaken the global energy landscape, and the implications are staggering. Canada has taken a bold step that fundamentally changes the power dynamics between North America and Asia, and the ripple effects are already being felt across international markets. For over 3 decades, Canada funneled its natural gas exports exclusively through pipelines to the United States. In 2024 alone, approximately 8.8 billion cubic feet of gas flowed daily across the border, generating around $8 billion in annual revenue. This arrangement kept Canada locked in a dependent relationship with its southern neighbor, making it vulnerable to political tensions and trade disputes. The game changed completely on June 30, 2025, when Canada launched its first overseas shipment of liquefied natural gas directly to Asia. This marked the end of an era of dependency and the beginning of energy independence that could reshape global trade patterns for decades to come. The catalyst for this transformation was the opening of the LNG Canada terminal in Kitimat, British Columbia. This massive infrastructure project, built at a cost of roughly 40 billion Canadian dollars, allows Canada to compress and chill natural gas to minus 165 degrees Celsius, reducing its volume by more than 600 times for efficient maritime transport. The engineering achievement represents more than technological prowess. It represents strategic liberation. What makes this development particularly significant is the geographic advantage it provides. Traditional pipeline routes through the United States to reach global markets often required up to 20 days through congested shipping channels like the Panama Canal. Now, Canadian LNG can reach Asian markets in as little as 10 days through direct Pacific shipping lanes. The first shipment, carried by the vessel Gas Log Glasgow, departed with 2.66 million tons of high-grade liquefied natural gas, inaugurating a faster and more resilient corridor to Asia's largest economies. The economic implications extend far beyond shipping efficiency. Previously, Canadian gas was priced significantly below U.S. benchmarks, leaving producers vulnerable to foreign import tariffs and trade restrictions. Recent administrative decisions have imposed substantial duties on Canadian imports, creating pricing disadvantages and threatening long-term contract viability. The pivot to Asian markets eliminates these vulnerabilities entirely. Asian demand for LNG continues its relentless climb, driven by industrial expansion, energy diversification goals, and climate policies. Japan is planning to add at least 20 million tons of LNG capacity annually starting in 2026. South Korea is expanding its LNG storage by 50% over the next decade. China has already secured multiple long-term supply contracts in preparation for coming seasonal demands. In this white-hot demand environment, Canada arrives as a welcome and strategically positioned supplier. The environmental credentials of this project set it apart from competitors globally. The LNG Canada facility operates primarily on hydroelectric power, positioning it among the lowest-emission LNG export terminals worldwide. Equipment designed by international firms minimizes carbon output and environmental impact, addressing the growing demand for cleaner energy sources in climate-conscious markets. Construction of this project generated over 50,000 Canadian jobs during its 7-year development phase and resulted in 5.88 billion Canadian dollars in contracts with local firms and Indigenous communities. The Haisla Nation holds equity stakes in the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which stretches nearly 700 kilometers to connect shale gas fields in northeastern British Columbia directly to the liquefaction T. Technologically, the facility operates 2 liquefaction trains capable of producing up to 14 million tons of LNG annually. The infrastructure represents cutting-edge engineering designed to handle the harsh weather conditions and remote terrain that characterize the Canadian landscape. While these factors drove construction and operating costs higher than projects in warmer climates, targeted government incentives helped offset investment burdens. Looking toward the future, momentum appears unstoppable. By 2026, LNG Canada expects to conduct more than 170 voyages annually to ports across Asia, including major destinations in Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. This will multiply revenue streams while allowing Canada to detach itself from policy volatility in other markets. Long-term expansion plans are already in motion to double the project's capacity to 28 million tons per year, a move that would rank Canada among the world's top 5 LNG exporters. Achieving this expansion will require tens of billions in additional investment and continued compliance with demanding environmental standards, but market conditions appear increasingly favorable. Asian buyers are prioritizing stable and clean energy sources amid global efforts to transition away from coal and reduce dependence on politically volatile regions. With every ship that leaves Kitimat's coast, Canada steps further into a new geopolitical posture defined not by pipeline constraints or trade vulnerabilities, but by maritime flexibility and diversified global markets. The shift to maritime exports brings geographic freedom that insulates Canada from sudden regulatory changes and trade conflicts that have repeatedly strained relationships with traditional partners. When nearly 100% of exported gas previously crossed a single border, the energy sector was exposed to external decisions beyond its control. Direct access to Asian markets has fundamentally recalibrated this balance of power. Asian demand continues its upward trajectory. Driven by industrial needs, energy diversification goals, and climate policies. Countries across the Pacific Rim are competing to secure stable supplies, with liquefied natural gas becoming central to energy transition strategies due to its lower emissions profile compared to coal or oil. Unlike resources deeply entwined with political instability in certain producing regions, LNG allows for more predictable sourcing, especially from suppliers perceived as stable, democratic, and environmentally accountable. For Japan, which imports over 80% of its energy needs, securing Canadian LNG offers more than fuel, it provides a geopolitical hedge. South Korea views LNG as protection against volatility from pipeline gas originating in unstable regions. China sees Canadian LNG as a long-term stabilizer in markets defined by fluctuating regional dynamics. These countries function not merely as passive buyers, but as active stakeholders shaping Canada's LNG infrastructure. Companies from Japan, South Korea, China, and Malaysia participate in the joint venture behind the LNG Canada project. This multinational collaboration spreads financial risk while aligning producer and consumer interests over decades. Global energy leadership demands more than infrastructure alone. It requires reliability, environmental responsibility, and long-term strategic planning. LNG Canada's success reflects a carefully calculated approach that combines massive reserves in British Columbia's Montney Basin with state-of-the-art liquefaction technology, connecting these assets to some of the world's most energy-hungry markets while integrating indigenous partnerships and maintaining stringent environmental standards. The path forward involves complex challenges. Building Phase 2 will require doubling capacity from 14 million tons to 28 million tons annually. This expansion demands enhanced pipeline infrastructure, larger liquefaction facilities, and potentially additional marine terminals. Financing such growth in a high-interest environment with evolving environmental, social, and governance expectations presents formidable obstacles. Environmental compliance continues tightening. Canada's national carbon pricing regime, combined with British Columbia's environmental regulations, imposes stricter emissions controls than most LNG-producing countries. This pressure requires continuous investment in cleaner technologies, carbon capture systems, and biodiversity protections. Failure to meet these standards could trigger regulatory penalties and investor backlash. International competition intensifies simultaneously. Qatar's Northfield expansion, United States Gulf Coast terminals, and Australia's renewed LNG investment cycles are expanding rapidly. These projects benefit from warmer climates, lower construction costs, and proximity to established global shipping routes. Canada must deliver more than geographic proximity to Asia. It must provide consistency, environmental leadership, and community impact. Canada maintains one powerful advantage in this competition: credibility. Political stability, transparent legal frameworks, and strong environmental, social, and governance profiles make it a trusted supplier in an uncertain world. While countries scramble to replace sanctioned or politically volatile energy sources, Canadian LNG stands out as safe, scalable, and environmentally responsible. By decoupling from pipeline dependency and building Pacific access, Canada no longer merely reacts to global energy shifts, but helps shape them. The LNG project represents more than industrial achievement. It provides a blueprint for how resource-rich nations can transition from regional dependence to global influence while honoring environmental and social commitments. As investment decisions approach, the world watches not just to see if Canada can meet rising demand, but whether this model of energy development can be replicated, refined, and expanded. Canada's strategy extends beyond LNG to encompass a future where energy, economy, and environment advance together, where geographic isolation becomes advantage rather than barrier. This future depends on Canada's ability to manage the delicate balance between growth, sustainability, and global competitiveness. Phase 2 of LNG Canada represents both enormous opportunity and complex challenge. Scaling production to 28 million tons per year could solidify Canada's position among the top 5 LNG exporters globally, alongside Qatar, the United States, and Australia. Attracting required capital, estimated in tens of billions of Canadian dollars, demands more than technical success. Stakeholders must demonstrate environmental leadership and strong community partnerships. The equity participation of the Haisla Nation offers a model that could shape future infrastructure development nationwide, ensuring Indigenous voices integrate directly into decision-making processes with tangible economic benefits flowing to communities. This inclusive growth model becomes a critical metric for global energy buyers. Many Asian importers tie procurement decisions to price and reliability, while increasingly considering environmental and social governance profiles of suppliers. Canada's high performance in these areas, rooted in renewable energy usage, transparent regulations, and Indigenous partnerships, provides competitive advantages few exporters can match. Environmental innovations continue developing as global markets shape us. And cleaner fuels, Canada invests in technologies to minimize carbon intensity of LNG exports. Plans include exploring carbon capture and storage options for future expansion phases, while integrating additional hydroelectric power to reduce emissions further. In a world moving rapidly toward decarbonization, these measures become essential for long-term viability. The geographic advantage of British Columbia's West Coast gains increasing importance. As global shipping routes face disruptions from congested Panama Canal operations to geopolitical instability in other regions, Canada's direct Pacific access becomes a strategic asset. Shorter transit times reduce shipping costs while lowering the carbon footprint of each voyage, making Canadian LNG more attractive to environmentally conscious buyers. The international energy landscape remains volatile. Conflicts, sanctions, and fluctuating prices continue reshaping global trade patterns. Energy security has become a national priority for many countries. For Japan, South Korea, and China, sourcing LNG from a politically stable, diplomatically neutral country like Canada adds resilience to energy planning. Even as new markets open, Canada cannot afford complacency. Emerging players in Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean make their own moves into LNG markets. Innovations in floating liquefaction and small-scale terminals challenge traditional export models. To maintain leadership, Canada must continue investing in technology, expanding partnerships, and enhancing supply chain efficiency. Regulatory coordination proves essential. Governments at provincial and federal levels must streamline permitting, clarify taxation frameworks, and ensure environmental assessments remain thorough yet timely. Long delays or policy uncertainty could deter investors and weaken Canada's position, just as global LNG demand peaks. The stakes are substantial. Well managed, Canada's LNG sector could become an economic cornerstone for decades. Generating billions in annual revenue, creating tens of thousands of high-skilled jobs, and reinforcing international influence. Mismanaged, it risks becoming a cautionary tale of overextension and missed opportunity. The decision to pursue LNG exports was never solely about gas. It represented sovereignty, diversification, and shaping a future on Canada's terms. With every shipment leaving Kitimat, Canada moves closer to that vision as a nation no longer defined by reliance on single trading partners. The road ahead tests policy limits, engineering capabilities, diplomatic skills, and environmental responsibility. One fact emerges clearly: Canada is no longer a quiet bystander in global energy markets. It has entered the arena with ambition, credibility, and long-term planning. As Canada deepens its global energy presence, coming years will demand momentum and resilience. International energy markets undergo profound transformation as nations race to secure long-term supply contracts amid escalating geopolitical uncertainty and tightening environmental mandates. For buyers, considerations extend beyond cost to include trust, long-term reliability, and alignment with decarbonization strategies. Canada is uniquely positioned to offer something increasingly rare: a supply source that is geopolitically neutral, environmentally progressive, and economically scalable. This credibility stems from infrastructure and decades of transparent governance, strong rule of law, and adherence to multilateral standards. Energy importing countries across Asia seek partners offering not just fuel, but predictability. With its clean hydroelectric power base, strict regulatory enforcement, and inclusive community development, Canada's LNG profile resonates beyond raw export volume numbers. Credibility alone cannot carry the sector forward. Global competition is fierce and advancing rapidly. Qatar's expansion plans will deliver over 100 million tons of LNG annually. The United States rapidly builds new Gulf Coast terminals with flexible delivery contracts, appealing to buyers wary of rigid long-term commitments. Australia strengthens its Southeast Asian presence through offshore developments and regional partnerships. To compete with these giants, Canada must remain agile, accelerating Phase 2 timelines while exploring additional West Coast export facilities. Diversifying terminal capacity will reduce bottlenecks while expanding Canada's ability to respond to short-term market shifts, spot demand spikes, and regional supply disruptions. Another factor favoring Canada is the growing premium on low-carbon LNG. As carbon border adjustment mechanisms gain traction and similar models emerge in Asia, buyers factor emissions intensity directly into procurement decisions. Canadian LNG, powered by hydroelectricity and developed under strict regulatory frameworks, stands to benefit from these emerging pricing structures. To capitalize fully on this advantage, Canada must make bold, forward-looking investments including carbon capture and storage systems, enhanced methane leak detection, and electrification of upstream production where feasible. Research partnerships with universities, technology firms, and environmental organizations ensure innovation remains central to LNG expansion, keeping emissions low without compromising output. Domestically, a balancing act must be maintained. While many Canadians support resource development, growing public demand exists for accountability, transparency, and environmental responsibility. Ensuring financial benefits of LNG expansion, including royalties, taxes, and community investments, are equitably distributed will be, as he says, NTL for maintaining public trust. Indigenous inclusion remains among the most critical aspects of that trust. The Haisla Nation's participation in LNG Canada represents not symbolic gesture, but structural shift in how energy infrastructure is conceived and delivered. As future projects advance, this model will likely evolve into expectation that Indigenous communities function as co-developers and equity partners from initial stages. International buyers observe this development closely. In a world increasingly attuned to ethical sourcing and environmental justice, Canada's ability to integrate social equity into energy expansion emerges as a key differentiator. Where other exporters face scrutiny over land use, labor practices, or environmental degradation, Canada offers a model that, while imperfect, moves steadily toward best practices. Long-term goals extend beyond exporting more gas to shaping a future where Canada becomes a pillar of global energy stability. A supplier known not just for volume, but for vision. A nation meeting world energy needs without compromising environmental commitments, citizens' welfare, or foundational principles. The departure of that first cargo on June 30th, 2025, represented more than a shipment. It was a signal that Canada has stepped into a new role, not as a regional exporter constrained by geography, but as a global energy partner shaped by integrity, innovation, and purposeful intent. The path ahead demands clarity of purpose, coordination across governments and industry, and careful navigation through evolving global trends. If this early chapter indicates future direction, Canada is prepared not only to meet the moment, but to help define what responsible energy leadership looks like in the 21st century.